My children left me for dead in an ICU bed, while they went on a luxury cruise. That's not an exaggeration. It's the simple, cold truth. So I sold our family home, took every penny we had, and simply vanished. When they finally came back from their sun-soaked vacation, they came back to nothing. This is the story of how I died to my old life, and was reborn in the ashes of their betrayal. Before I get into the gut-wrenching details of how it all fell apart, I'd love to know where you're all listening from. It's a comfort to me even now to know that stories can connect us across miles and time zones. Drop your city or your country in the comments below, and let me know what time it is where you are. It helps me feel like I'm not just talking into the void. Okay, let's begin. The first thing I remember was the sound. Not a human voice, not a soothing melody, but the sterile, relentless beep of a machine, counting out the seconds of my life. Beep, beep, beep. A sound that didn't care if I lived or died, it just kept its metronomic rhythm. A searing pain flared in my chest, a phantom echo of the massive heart attack that had tried to tear me from this world. I was at the Cleveland Clinic, a place people came to be saved, but I had never felt more lost, more utterly alone. The air tasted metallic and smelled of antiseptic and floor polish. My throat was raw, my mouth as dry and brittle as an old autumn leaf. I tried to swallow, a simple primal act, but there was nothing there. My eyes fluttered open, assaulted by the cheap fluorescent lights humming above me, a cruel buzzing imitation of daylight. They cast no shadows, offered no warmth. My body felt like a stranger's, a heavy, useless thing tethered to a web of tubes and wires. And 4-line was taped to my hand, a pulse oximeter glowed on my fingertip, and I could feel the uncomfortable presence of electrodes on my chest. I tried to lift my head, but the effort was monumental, sending a wave of dizziness through me. My vision swam in and out of focus until a kind face leaned over me. His name tag, clipped to his blue scrubs, read Marcus. He was a nurse, and his eyes, calm and brown, held a gentle worry that told me more than his words ever could. "Welcome back, Mrs. Peterson," he said, his voice soft, trying to breach the wall of noise from the machines. "You gave us quite a scare. It's good to have you with us." I tried to speak, to ask the only question that mattered, the question that was screaming inside my head, but all that came out was a dry, pathetic rasp. He seemed to understand. He held a small cup of water with a straw to my lips, and the cool liquid was the most wonderful thing I had ever tasted. It was life. I took another sip and tried again. "My children," I croaked, the names feeling foreign on my tongue. Ghosts from a life before the beeping machines. Amanda? Mark. They were my world, my sun and moon. Amanda, my fierce, ambitious daughter, so full of fire and plans. Mark, my steady, thoughtful son, the quiet rock. I had raised them on my own after their father, Frank, passed away so suddenly. I worked double shifts as a high school English teacher, graded papers late into the night, all to make sure they never wanted for anything, to ensure their path was smoother than mine had been. The thought of them, their faces, was the only solid thing in a swirling sea of confusion and pain. They had to be here. They had to be. Marcus's professional smile tightened just a fraction of an inch. It was almost imperceptible, but when you're lying in an ICU bed stripped of everything, you learn to read the small things. You become an expert in the silent, devastating language of hesitation. "They know you're here, Carol," he said, his gaze flicking away for a split second. He was avoiding a direct answer. "They were very worried. You just focus on resting now. That's the most important thing for you. But a mother knows. There's an invisible string that connects you to your children, a cord that vibrates with their joy and their pain." And mine felt slack, lifeless. The dread began to pool in the pit of my stomach, colder and more painful than any surgical incision. I searched his face for a sliver of reassurance, for a sign that my fears were just a side effect of the medication, a phantom of the anesthesia. But I found only professional sympathy, a carefully constructed wall of kindness that couldn't hide the truth. He was pitying me. He said they would be here, but his eyes told a completely different story. Sleep didn't come that night. How could it? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my children's faces. Not as they were now, as adults with complicated lives, but as they were when they were small. Amanda, with a gap-toothed grin, holding up a dandelion. Mark, fast asleep on my chest, his tiny hand curled around my finger. These were the memories that had sustained me for years. Now they felt like daggers. The ICU is a profoundly lonely place in the dead of night, a liminal space between life and death where the only company is the rhythmic sigh of a nearby ventilator and the frantic, unsteady beating of your own fragile heart. I was trapped in a glass box, watching the ghost of a life move on without me. Sometime after midnight, a hush fell over the ward. The frantic energy of the day shift had been replaced by the hushed, focused efficiency of the night crew. Marcus was at the nurse's station, just beyond the thin, beige curtain that served as my door. His voice was low, professional, but in the profound, waiting silence of the ICU, every word carried as if he were standing at my bedside. I held my breath, my entire being focused on straining to hear. "Yes, Miss Peterson," he was saying into the phone. I knew that formal title. It was Amanda. My heart leaped with a desperate, foolish hope. She was on the phone. She was checking in. The relief was so powerful, so sudden it made me dizzy. "See," a little voice in my head whispered. "You were wrong. It was all in your head. Your mother is stable now," Marcus continued. "She's conscious and asking for you. She's out of the woods for now." Then came the pause. It was a long, stretching silence that felt like an eternity. I could picture my daughter on the other end, her brow furrowed in concentration. Was she looking at her calendar? Her watch? What could possibly be so important that she would hesitate? I imagined her standing on the deck of a ship, the ocean breeze in her hair, annoyed at the interruption. The image was so clear it was painful. "Oh," Marcus said, and that single word was a death knell. All the warmth, all the relief drained from his voice, leaving it flat and professional. "I see. No, I understand. It's just, she's been asking for you specifically." Another agonizing pause. I could hear the faint, tinny sound of her voice on the other end, but couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. The tone was impatient. "Okay. Got it," Marcus said, his voice now clipped. "I'll let her know you called to check in." He hung up. I lay there, perfectly still, blinking at the acoustic tiles on the ceiling, each one a perfect soulless square. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. The words echoed in the silent chamber of my mind. "Would you like to speak to her?" And the answer, unspoken but deafeningly clear, had been no. My daughter, my firstborn, the child I had rocked to sleep and nursed through fevers, knew I was awake and clinging to life, and she had chosen not to hear my voice. The pain in my chest flared again, sharp and hot, but this time it had nothing to do with my heart muscle. It was the agony of a sacred bond breaking, strand by painful strand. The next morning arrived, gray and joyless. A new nurse, a brisk, efficient woman who didn't meet my eye, came in to tidy my bedside table. As she moved my water cup in the small plastic pitcher, I saw it. A single piece of lined paper, torn from a notepad folded in half. It hadn't been there before. Marcus must have left it. My hand trembled as I reached for it, the simple movement sending a jolt of pain through my bruised body. I unfolded it. The handwriting was Amanda's, a rushed, looping script I'd known my whole life. It was a note you'd leave on the refrigerator before a weekend trip. "Gone on our cruise for 10 days. Hope you're better when we get back. A&M. That was it. 10 days. A cruise. Not "we love you." Not "we're praying for you." Not even a phone number in case of emergency. It was an announcement of their absence. A declaration that their leisure was more important than my life. Each word was a tiny, sharp blade. It wasn't a single stab wound. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each one slicing away at the woman I thought I was, the mother I thought I had been. That note was just the beginning. What I was about to discover would tear down everything I thought I knew about my own family. The 10 days that followed were the longest and loneliest of my life. I existed in a strange, suspended reality, marked not by the rising and setting of the sun, but by the changing of nursing shifts and the scheduled delivery of medication. I was a prisoner in my own body, watching the minutes tick by on the large wall clock, each tick a mocking reminder of the tropical sun my children were enjoying while I was learning to breathe on my own again. The doctors and nurses were kind, of course, but their kindness was professional, clinical. It was the kindness of strangers, a poor substitute for the familiar touch of a daughter's hand or the comforting sound of a son's voice. Played my part. When they asked about my family, I told them my children were on a once-in-a-lifetime trip that they couldn't possibly cancel. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I was protecting their reputation, a mother's reflex as ingrained as breathing, even as I felt like they were suffocating me with their silence. Each day, a small foolish part of me hoped the phone would ring, that a bouquet of flowers would arrive. Nothing came. The silence from their end was absolute. On the 10th day, a cheerful young doctor with a brightly patterned tie informed me I was well enough to be discharged. Instead of relief, a wave of pure panic washed over me. Discharged to where? Who was coming for me? The cruise should be over. Surely they would be here. I hadn't heard a single word from Amanda or Mark. Not one call, not one text. Just a gaping, terrifying silence that had become my constant companion. I spent that morning sitting on the edge of the hospital bed in a flimsy, faded gown, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles were white. I watched the door to my room, my heart leaping with a painful jolt every time it opened, only to crash back down when I saw it was just a nurse or an orderly. By early afternoon, a hospital caseworker came to my room. Her name was Linda, and she had a kind but weary face that told me she had delivered bad news more times than she could count. "Carol," she said gently, pulling up a chair. "Your discharge papers are all ready. I've been trying to reach your daughter's cell number all morning, but it goes straight to voicemail. The cruise, I suppose. Sometimes the signal is poor when they disembark." I just nodded, unable to speak past the enormous lump that had formed in my throat. "We can't keep you here any longer as you're medically stable," she continued, her voice filled with a pity that made my skin crawl. "So we've arranged for a volunteer transport to take you home. Her name is Chloe. She's a lovely girl, a student from the local university. She's waiting for you downstairs in the main lobby. A volunteer. My own children, my flesh and blood, were off somewhere, probably dealing with their luggage or sitting in an airport bar. And a stranger, a young woman who owed me nothing, was the one tasked with taking me home. The humiliation was a physical thing. A hot, prickly flush that spread across my chest and up my neck. Chloe was as sweet as Linda had promised, a bubbly chatterbox who tried her best to fill the silence in the car with stories about her classes and her boyfriend. Her youthful optimism was a stark, painful contrast to the black hole that had opened up in my soul. The ride home to my small brick house in the quiet Cleveland suburbs was surreal. I stared out the window at the familiar streets, but they looked different now, as if I were seeing them through a distorted, smudged lens. As we turned onto my block, my phone, which had been tragically silent for over a week, buzzed in my purse. I fumbled for it, my heart pounding with that same foolish glimmer of hope. Maybe it was Amanda, calling to say they'd landed and were on their way. But it wasn't. The caller ID read, Martha Gable. My next-door neighbor for 30 years, a woman who had watched my children grow up. "Carol dear, thank heavens!" she exclaimed, her thin, reedy voice tight with worry. "I've been so worried. I saw the ambulance take you away." "I'm all right, Martha," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Just a little scare. I'm actually on my way home now, just a few houses down." "Oh, thank goodness," she said, but then she hesitated. "Carol, I don't want to alarm you, dear, but I've seen some strange things this past week. I saw David, Amanda's husband, carrying boxes out of your house almost every day. And yesterday, oh dear, this is so awkward. I saw your beautiful oak dining set, the one you love so much, listed on Facebook Marketplace. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." The phone slipped from my grasp and clattered to the floor of the car. The world tilted on its axis and went silent, except for the rushing sound of blood in my ears. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just carelessness. This was something else entirely. Something methodical. Something predatory. Something cruel. When the transport van stopped in front of my house, I was prepared for the worst. But what I saw was somehow more horrifying than anything I could have imagined. The first thing I noticed from the car was the emptiness on the porch. My two white wicker rocking chairs, the ones where my husband Frank and I had spent countless summer evenings watching the fireflies, were gone. The large terracotta pots, usually overflowing with my prize-winning blue hydrangeas, were also missing. The entire front of my house looked naked, violated, like a familiar smiling face that had been struck, now swollen and bruised. Chloe, the sweet volunteer, helped me out of the van, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "Are you sure this is the right place, Mrs. Peterson?" she asked softly, her eyes scanning the barren porch. It looks a little empty. This is it, I whispered, my voice barely audible. My legs felt like they were made of lead as I took a shaky step towards the front door. It was my home, yet it felt alien and hostile. I automatically reached for the ceramic frog planter by the steps. A silly gift from Mark years ago. The place where a spare key had always been hidden. My fingers scrabbled inside the cold, hollow space, but they found only dirt and a few dead, brittle leaves. The key was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I knocked, my knuckles rapping against the solid oak door. The sound echoed in the sudden, unnerving silence of the street. After a long moment that stretched into an eternity, I heard the slide of a bolt, and the door creaked open. It was David, my son-in-law. He was holding a Starbucks cup and wearing an old sweatshirt stained with gray paint. The look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated shock, the expression of a burglar caught mid-heist by the returning homeowner. "Carol," he stammered, his eyes wide and shifty. He actually took a half-step back. You're home. We didn't expect you back so soon." "The hospital discharged me," I said, my voice flat and cold, devoid of the warmth I usually held for him. I pushed past him, my shoulder brushing his, and stepped into the entryway of my own home. And I stopped breathing. My living room was gone. My comfortable floral sofa where my children had built forts, my antique coffee table Frank had refinished by hand, the tall bookshelves groaning with classics I'd taught for 40 years. All of it had vanished. In its place were stacks of flattened cardboard boxes, drop cloths, and open cans of paint. The walls, once a warm buttery yellow, were half painted a hideous sterile shade of gray, a color I would never ever choose. A dusty painter's tarp was thrown over the spot where my life had once been. The air smelled sharp and chemical, the scent of erasure. What is this, David?" I asked, my voice trembling as I turned to face him. "Where are my things? Where is my furniture?" He wouldn't look at me. His eyes darted around the ruined room, anywhere but at my face. "Amanda and we thought we'd surprise you," he said, the lie so clumsy, so insulting it was almost comical. "A little redecorating. To freshen the place up for when you got home. We wanted it to be perfect for your recovery." "Freshen it up?" He said it so casually, like he was talking about changing the throw pillows, not obliterating a lifetime of memories. I walked numbly, as if in a trance, towards the dining room. The beautiful oak set that Martha Gable had seen on Facebook was, of course, gone. And on the kitchen counter, where my ceramic fruit bowl used to sit, lay a stack of glossy, professional-looking flyers. My hand shook so violently I could barely pick one up. The headline read in a cheerful, bold font, "Charming suburban gem. Perfect for a young family." Below it was a professionally taken photograph of my house. My home of over 35 years listed for sale. I think I made a sound then, a small wounded noise from the back of my throat, like a dying animal. My legs gave out completely, and I sank onto one of the cold, hard paint cans, the metal rim biting into my skin. "You're selling my house," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of a fact so monstrous, so profoundly evil, I couldn't yet comprehend its full scope. This is when he switched tactics, his demeanor changing in an instant. He knelt in front of me, his face a mask of false, cloying concern. "Carol, you've been through a major health crisis," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "The doctors said you might be confused, disoriented. We're just trying to do what's best for you. Managing a big house like this is too much now. We found a wonderful place for you." He was standing in my home, a home filled with memories he had no part in making, telling me I was crazy. The audacity was breathtaking. "And I have to ask you, if you were in my shoes, standing there weak from surgery, surrounded by the ruins of your life, what would you have done? What would your first move be? Let me know in the comments. I truly want to know what you think." He thought I was weak. He thought I was broken and confused. But he forgot one crucial thing. He was messing with a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Words felt useless, inadequate in the face of such a monumental betrayal. I just sat there on that cold paint can, staring at the glossy flyer in my hand. The cheerful marketing copy felt like a personal obituary. Ideal for young families. A 3-word phrase designed to neatly and efficiently erase me from my own life. David continued his sickening performance, babbling on about my health, about the wonderful benefits of a managed care facility. A euphemism so sterile and chilling it made my blood run cold. He truly thought he was talking to a confused, senile old woman who could be easily placated and controlled. He had no idea he was talking to a mother whose heart had just been replaced with a shard of ice. Finally, I pushed myself to my feet, using the half-painted wall for support. The gray paint felt chalky and foreign under my fingertips. "I need to use the restroom," I said, my voice eerily calm, devoid of any emotion. I needed a moment alone, a moment to think, to breathe air that wasn't thick with the stench of his lies and fresh paint. "Of course, Carol, take your time," he said, a relieved look on his face. He probably thought the fight was over, that I was succumbing to my confusion. I walked down the hallway, a path I could have navigated in my sleep, but it felt like a foreign country. My hand trailed along the wall where a long row of family photos used to hang. I could still see the faint, lighter-colored rectangles on the wallpaper, ghosts of a happier time. A photo of Amanda's graduation, Mark's first t-ball game, our last family vacation with Frank. All gone. The door to the small office where Frank used to pay the bills was ajar. Inside, more boxes were stacked, labeled in Amanda's neat handwriting. Donations. Trash. Tucked away on a dusty shelf behind a stack of old tax returns was an old iPad Mark used to use when he visited. It was an impulse, a desperate, grasping lunge for a lifeline in a sea of despair. Picked it up. The screen was dark and smudged with fingerprints. By some small miracle of modern technology, the battery still had a sliver of life. I pressed the home button, and the screen lit up with a picture of Mark's dog. And there, on the home screen, were the notifications. A cascade of them from his message app. He hadn't bothered to log out. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages, trembling as I tapped the green icon. The conversation between him and Amanda was right at the top, a running commentary of their treachery. The first messages were dated the day after my heart attack. "Amanda. Just got off the phone with the realtor. He thinks we can get it listed by the end of the week. David is starting to clear out the big furniture now. He found a buyer for the dining set already. Mark, good. Did you handle the POA paperwork? We need that to make it all legal. Don't want any snags. Amanda. Already scanned it to him. It's the durable one she signed after her knee surgery. She thought it was just for insurance paperwork. So easy. She didn't even read it. Mark. Perfect. Once the house sells, we'll finally have some breathing room. I can pay off my car loan and the credit cards. Amanda. And I can finally put a real down payment on that bigger house in the better school district. The assisted living facility is all lined up. It's a nice one, really. She'll be fine. She'll have people her own age. Breathing room. The words pulsed on the screen, mocking me. They needed breathing room. From me. From the woman who worked 2 jobs after their father died so they could go to the best colleges without a mountain of debt. From the woman who emptied her savings account without a second thought to help Mark start his failed business. Who co-signed Amanda's first mortgage when no bank would approve her. This was my reward. To be packed up and put away, my life liquidated to fund their lifestyle upgrades. Beneath the messages, in a cloud folder labeled Mom's House, was a scanned document. I tapped on it, my vision blurring with hot, angry tears. It was the power of attorney. A durable PO. And there at the bottom was my own signature, weak and shaky from the post-op medication I'd been on that day. I remembered it vaguely now. Amanda at my bedside, a thick stack of papers in her hand, her expression one of concern. Just some standard hospital forms, Mom. Sign here and here so I can talk to the billing department for you. I had been drifting in and out of a fuzzy haze, trusting my daughter completely. I had handed her the weapon she would use to execute my life as I knew it. They thought they had one. They thought they had covered all their bases and I was too sick and frail to fight back. But they had made one fatal, arrogant mistake. They had left behind a written confession. I didn't storm out of the office and confront David. What would be the point? He was just a foot soldier, a willing pawn in a game orchestrated by my own children. To argue with him, to show him my hand, would be a complete waste of the precious, dwindling energy I had. No, this required a different kind of warfare. A quieter, more strategic approach. I walked out of the office, the heavy iPad clutched to my chest like a piece of body armor. I made sure my face was a blank mask, my eyes downcast. I found David in the kitchen scrolling through his phone, probably checking the listing for my house. I looked him straight in the eye, letting him see the weary, defeated woman he expected to see. "I'm very tired," I said, my voice a quiet, dangerous calm. "The doctor said I need a lot of rest. I'm going to go lie down in my room." My bedroom was the only space they hadn't completely dismantled yet, though a stack of empty, flattened boxes in the corner served as a grim promise of what was to come. David looked visibly relieved, a wave of it washing over his face. He probably thought the confused old woman was just going to take a nap and forget the whole unpleasant business with the flyer. He nodded eagerly, his performance of the caring son-in-law back in full swing. "Of course, Carol. You rest up. That's the best thing for you. I'll be here if you need anything at all." "I'm sure you will," I said, the words coated in an irony he was too smug to detect. I closed the bedroom door behind me and slid the small flimsy bolt lock into place. It was more of a symbolic gesture than a real barrier. It wouldn't stop him if he really wanted to get in, but it gave me a sliver of privacy, a small pocket of space in my own home that was still mine. I sat on the edge of my bed, the springs groaning in protest, and I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. Crying was a luxury, an indulgence I simply couldn't afford. What settled over me instead was a cold, hard rage. It was a clean, purifying fire, burning away the grief and the shock, leaving behind only the steel of purpose. They had underestimated me. That was their critical error. They saw me as a collection of symptoms: a weak heart, a post-op patient, an aging mother. They saw me as a burden, a problem to be managed and neatly disposed of. They had forgotten who I was at my core. They had forgotten the woman who had stared down bank managers after Frank died, who had battled the school board for better resources, the woman who had single-handedly kept our family afloat through grief and financial hardship. They had forgotten that I was a survivor. My mind, which had felt so foggy and slow in the hospital, was now humming with a frantic, crystalline clarity. I raced through my options, discarding them one by one. I couldn't call the police. This was a civil matter, a messy family dispute. They had a document, a legal weapon with my signature on it. It would be my word, the word of a recently incapacitated senior, against theirs. They would paint me as a sick, confused woman who didn't know what was best for her. I needed a different kind of help. I needed an ally. Then, a memory surfaced from the fog. A few months ago, before the world had tilted off its axis, I'd attended a free seminar at the local senior center. It was about protecting yourself from common scams and financial abuse targeting the elderly. The speaker was a young lawyer, sharp, articulate, and passionate. He had spoken with such fire and conviction about defending the elderly, about fighting for those who felt voiceless. His name. I closed my eyes, digging through the files of my memory. Carter. Ben Carter. That was it. I kept all my papers in a file box in my closet. My hands trembled as I pulled it down, shuffling through old utility bills and bank statements until I found the pamphlet from that day. There it was, a simple professional handout. Ben Carter, ESQ, Elder Law and Estate Planning. And below it, a phone number. I stared at it for a long time. Making that call felt like stepping off a cliff into a dark, unknown abyss. It meant admitting to a complete stranger the humiliating truth that my own children had betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable. It meant turning a private agony into a public battle. But what was the alternative? To let them win? To be quietly shuffled off to a facility while they carved up my life and spent the proceeds on new cars and bigger houses? No. Not while I still had a single breath in my body. I picked up my cell phone, my fingers fumbling with the numbers on the screen. The phone rang twice and then a calm, professional voice answered. Law offices of Ben Carter. "Hello," I said, my voice shaking despite my newfound resolve. "My name is Carol Peterson. I need to speak with Mr. Carter. It's an emergency. I had one chance. One small, desperate chance to turn this nightmare around. And I was going to take it." The paralegal on the phone was polite but firm. A gatekeeper doing her job. Mr. Carter was in court all day, and his schedule was booked solid for the next 2 weeks. My heart plummeted into my stomach. 2 weeks was a lifetime. My house could be sold by then. The contents of my life scattered to the four winds. "Please," I begged, the carefully constructed calm in my voice cracking. revealing the raw desperation beneath. You don't understand. My children are trying to sell my house out from under me. They got me to sign a power of attorney when I was sick. I have proof they're committing fraud. Please, I just need 5 minutes. I hated how weak and pathetic I sounded, but I had no pride left to swallow. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the clicking of a keyboard. Tell me your name again, ma'am. Carol Peterson, I repeated. Hold on one moment, Mrs. Peterson. I heard muffled talking in the background, the professional murmur of an office. I held my breath, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. Then a man's voice came on the line, clear and focused. This is Ben Carter. I can give you 5 minutes. Tell me everything. And so I did. Huddled on my bedroom floor, with my son-in-law just down the hall, I whispered the whole sordid, unbelievable story into the phone. I told him about waking up in the ICU, the cruise, the cold note, the sold furniture, the shocking real estate flyer, the damning iPad messages, the pill I had signed under a fog of painkillers. I expected disbelief, or at least a healthy dose of professional skepticism. Instead, he just listened, his silence a powerful invitation to pour out all the poison that was choking me. He would occasionally interrupt with a sharp, pointed question. What was the date on the POA? Do you remember who the notary was? Did they give you a copy at the time? When I finished, my voice was raw, my throat tight with unshed tears. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear the faint scratching of a pen on paper. Mrs. Peterson, he said finally, and his voice was no longer just calm. It was filled with a steely, righteous anger. What your children are doing is a classic and frankly disgusting case of elder financial abuse. But from what you're telling me, they may have gotten greedy and made a very serious mistake. A durable power of attorney is a powerful document, but it's not a blank check. Can you get me a copy of it? I have a picture of it on my phone from the iPad, I said, my heart starting to beat with a fragile, unfamiliar hope. Good. Email it to me right now. My address is on my website. Also email me the pictures of those text messages between your son and daughter. Do not, under any circumstances, confront your son-in-law. Don't let them know you suspect anything. Act frail, act confused, do whatever you have to do, but do not leave that house. I will call you back as soon as I've reviewed these documents. The next hour was the purest form of agony. I emailed him the photos, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type. I sat on my bed staring at the bedroom door, expecting David to burst in at any moment, accusing me of something. Every creak of the floorboards in the hallway sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. Then my phone buzzed, the name Ben Carter flashing on the screen. I answered it on the first ring. Carol, he said, and there was a new energy in his voice, the confident sound of a hunter who has found the trail. I've got it. They overreached. They got greedy and they got sloppy. He explained it to me in simple, clear terms that my panicked brain could understand. The POA they had me sign was a standard, generic template probably downloaded from the internet. It gave them the power to manage my bank accounts and pay my bills. But in the state of Ohio, for a power of attorney to grant the agent the power to sell real estate, especially the principal's primary residence, it requires very specific, explicit language, what he called a superdelegation. Language that was completely missing from this document. They can't sell your home, Carol. Not legally, he said, the words hitting me with the force of a physical blow. What they've done by listing the house and selling your property is fraud. Plain and simple. The relief was so immense, so total, it felt like a dam breaking inside me. I choked back a sob, tears finally spilling from my eyes. Not tears of grief or fear, but of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. What do we do now? I whispered, my voice thick. Now we fight back, he said, his voice grim and determined. I'm going to file for an emergency ex parte injunction to halt any pending sale and petition the court to have that POA revoked immediately. It will take a couple of weeks to get a hearing. In the meantime, you are in a vulnerable position. Your most important job is to play the part. Let them think their plan is working perfectly. We need the element of surprise on our side. Can you do that for me, Carol? Could I do it? I thought of my children's smiling faces in the old photographs, and then of their cold, calculating words on the iPad screen. Oh yes, I could do it. I could give the performance of a lifetime. I had a few weeks. A few weeks to play the victim, while secretly planning my own declaration of independence. They had started this war, but I was going to be the one to finish it. Living as a ghost in my own home was the hardest and most surreal role I've ever had to play. For the next 2 weeks, I became the woman my children believed me to be, frail, forgetful, and utterly, tragically defeated. I shuffled when I walked. I let my voice quaver when I spoke. I let a vacant, confused look settle in my eyes whenever David was around. He, in turn, played the part of the dutiful, caring son-in-law, a performance that grew more confident with each passing day as I offered no resistance. He would bring me bland meals on a tray, soup, toast, things he thought a sick old woman should eat. I would pick at them before claiming I had no appetite, my stomach churning with a mixture of anxiety and disgust. He would ask me to help him sort through boxes of what he called clutter and junk. My heart would break into a million tiny pieces as I watched him handle my late husband's beloved collection of history books with careless indifference, tossing them into a box marked donations. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming when he unwrapped the delicate porcelain music box my mother had given me, only to shrug and place it in the same box. I would feign confusion, asking the same questions over and over again to reinforce his narrative about my mental decline. "Who was that nice couple who came by today?" I'd ask after watching him give a detailed tour to a pair of prospective buyers, my heart pounding in my chest the entire time. "Just some friends of ours, Carol," he'd say, patting my hand with a condescending smile. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." I would nod meekly, a vacant look in my eyes while inside my mind was a whirlwind of activity, a command center for a one-woman resistance. Every night, after David had locked up and gone home to my daughter, my real work began. I became a creature of the dark, a spy in my own life. I would tiptoe through the hollowed-out, echoing rooms of my house, my phone in hand, documenting everything. I took pictures of the empty spaces where my furniture used to be, evidence of the theft. I made a detailed list of every item I knew was missing. I recorded snippets of his phone calls when he spoke too loudly on his cell in the backyard, boasting to Amanda about how smoothly everything was going and how cooperative I was being. During the day, I made clandestine calls to Ben from the bathroom with the shower running, whispering updates. He was my lifeline, my anchor in the storm. He told me the court date was set. We had a little over a week left. He was building his case, and the evidence I was gathering was invaluable. It was during this period of intense, stressful deception that I made a life-altering decision. It wasn't enough to just stop them. It wasn't enough to just reclaim my house and my money. Even if I won, what would be left? How could I ever feel safe in this house again? How could I ever sleep in this bed, knowing that in the room next door, my children had plotted to discard me like a piece of old furniture? I would spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for their next scheme, their next attempt to get what they wanted. No, I couldn't stay. Winning this single battle wasn't enough. I needed to escape the war entirely. That's when the new plan, a more radical and permanent plan, began to form in the late hours of the night. The plan to disappear. I started my research online, my iPad hidden under my mattress. I researched small, quiet towns in New England, places where no one would know the name Carol Peterson. I found a town in Vermont called Havenwood that looked like a place from a storybook. It was small, surrounded by mountains, with a community library and a slow, gentle pace of life. A place to heal. I started to build my new identity. Nora Smith. A simple, forgettable name. I opened a new bank account with a small, online-only bank under that name, funding it by secretly selling a few pieces of my mother's gold jewelry that my children had overlooked, tucked away in an old hat box in the back of my closet. I sold them to an online gold buyer. A transaction that was invisible and untraceable. I have to ask you this as I was sitting there, plotting my own escape like a prisoner of war. Imagine doing this in your own home, hiding from your own flesh and blood. Have you ever felt so cornered that you had to become someone else just to survive? It's a strange and profoundly lonely feeling. The days crawled by, each one a masterpiece of deception. I played my part to perfection. I let them believe they were in complete control. I was the helpless old woman, the problem that was almost solved. They had no idea that their problem was about to vanish and take everything with her. The court date was just 2 days away. My plan was in place. All I had to do was hold on for 48 more hours. The morning of the court hearing was gray and overcast, a perfect, moody backdrop for the storm that was about to break. David told me he had an important business meeting and would be out for most of the day. He left a poorly made sandwich for me in the fridge, a pathetic gesture of care that was so transparently false it was almost laughable. I waited, watching from the window, until his car disappeared down the street. The moment he was gone, my house, my prison, became my command center. I was on the phone with Ben. "It's done, Carol," he said, and I could hear the triumphant satisfaction in his voice. The judge didn't even hesitate. He read my brief, saw the evidence from the text messages, and immediately granted the emergency order. The injunction is in place. The sale is frozen, and the power of attorney has been officially and permanently revoked. You have full legal control of all your assets again. I closed my eyes, pressing a hand to my chest to still the wild, joyous beating of my heart. The weight that had been crushing me for weeks suddenly lifted. "Thank you, Ben," I whispered, the words thick with emotion. "I can never, ever thank you enough." "The thanks I need is for you to be safe and sound," he replied, his tone turning serious again. "Now listen carefully. A process server is on his way to serve the papers to your daughter at her office and your son at his apartment. They will know what you've done within the next 2 hours. They will not be happy. What's your plan?" "My plan is already in motion," I said, a newfound strength in my voice. As soon as I hung up with Ben, I made my second call. An hour later, a large, unmarked moving van pulled quietly into my driveway. The 2 men who got out were professional and discreet, just as the company had promised when I'd booked them under a false name and paid in cash. They weren't there to pack up my life. They were there to rescue the irreplaceable remnants of it. I had already packed what mattered most into a few small, manageable boxes, hidden in the back of my closet. They contained my husband's watch, my parents' wedding photos, the leather-bound books my father had left me, and a small, heartbreaking box of my children's childhood drawings from a time when they still looked at me with unconditional love instead of cold, calculating greed. The movers worked with quiet efficiency, loading the few boxes in my old, reliable Toyota Corolla onto the back of the truck. They were transporting my car and my most precious belongings to a secure storage unit I had rented online in a town just outside of Havenwood, Vermont. By the time Amanda and Mark figured out what had happened and where I might be, I would be long gone, and the pieces of my heart would be safely waiting for me. My last act in that house, my home of 35 years, was to write 2 letters. I used my best stationery, the cream-colored paper I saved for special occasions. I placed them side by side on the cold, empty kitchen counter where we had once shared so many meals. One was addressed to Amanda, the other to Mark. Inside each envelope, I had written the same 10 words, the words they had used in their cold-blooded text message exchange, words that had been seared into my brain. "You got your breathing room." Tucked inside each note like a final legalistic dagger, I placed a crisp, clean copy of the judge's order, the official document revoking their power and freezing the sale of my home. I took one last, slow walk through the house. I saw the indentations in the carpet where my sofa used to be, the faint, clean square on the dining room wall where our family portrait once hung. It was a house of ghosts now, haunted by the memory of a family that had imploded. I felt a pang of sadness, not for the house itself, but for the life I had tried so hard to build within its walls, a life that had turned out to be a fiction. But sadness was a luxury, and I had a long journey ahead. I walked out the front door and didn't lock it. There was nothing of value left for them to take. My getaway vehicle was not my Toyota. A prearranged car service, paid for in cash, was waiting for me at the end of the block. It took me to a bus station 2 towns over. From there, I would take a series of buses, paying in cash at every stop, slowly but surely making my way northeast. It was a slow, anonymous, untraceable method of travel. They would be looking for my car, not for a little old lady with a suitcase on a Greyhound bus. As I settled into my seat and watched the gray, industrial landscape of Ohio slide by, I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel sad. I felt a profound and overwhelming sense of release, of liberation. I was no longer Carol Peterson, the abandoned mother, the victim, the problem. I was on my way to becoming Nora Smith. And Nora was free. The journey to Vermont was a strange, disembodying experience, a 3-day blur of humming tires on asphalt, anonymous bus stations, and lonely meals at Formica diner counters. I moved across the country like a ghost in the machine, a quiet old woman with a book in her lap and a story no one would ever guess. I kept to myself, offering polite, brief smiles but never inviting conversation. I was a shadow leaving no trace. Paying for everything in cash, I left no digital footprint, no breadcrumb trail for them to follow. With each mile that put Ohio further in my rearview mirror, I felt the heavy, suffocating weight of my old life lifting. The identity of Carol Peterson shedding like a second skin I no longer needed. I finally arrived in a small town just over the Vermont border, and took a taxi to the storage facility. The driver was a talkative man who told me all about the coming foliage season, and I found myself relaxing for the first time in months. My Toyota Corolla, dusty but unharmed, was waiting for me, along with the few boxes that held the entirety of my past. I loaded them into the car, the familiar feel of the steering wheel under my hands a comforting reassurance. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was in complete control of my own destiny. Driving into Havenwood was like driving into a painting. The town was nestled in a pristine valley, surrounded by the majestic, ancient green mountains, their slopes already beginning to blush with the first hints of autumn color. A sparkling river, the Lamoille, cut through the center of town, and the main street was lined with charming historic brick buildings that housed a bookstore, a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and yeast, and a small independent movie theater with a vintage marquee. It was quiet. It was peaceful. It was everything my life in Cleveland had not been. I had already used some of my cash to prepay for the first 3 months' rent on a small furnished apartment above the town's bookstore. I had arranged it all through a rental agent who, true to Vermont form, asked no questions as long as the money was good. The apartment was small, just a living room with a comfortable armchair, a bedroom with a view of the mountains and a tiny kitchen, but it felt like a palace to me. It was mine. The windows looked out over the town square, and in the evening, I could sit and watch the world go by, hearing the faint, soothing sound of the river in the distance. The first few weeks were about the meticulous, deliberate process of establishing my new identity. I was Nora Smith, a retired librarian from a small, forgettable town in Pennsylvania whose husband had passed away a few years ago. I was widowed, childless, and looking for a quiet place to spend my retirement. The story was simple, believable, and just sad enough that people wouldn't pry too deeply. In a small town like Havenwood, people respect secrets. They assume that if you've shown up alone, you're probably running from something, and they're polite enough not to ask what. I went to the DMV and got a new Vermont driver's license. I opened a local bank account with the rest of my cash, establishing a financial anchor in my new home. I got a post office box, another layer of anonymity. I was meticulous, building a fortress of normalcy brick by boring everyday brick. My days fell into a simple, soothing rhythm that felt like a healing balm on my raw nerves. I would take long walks along the river, spend hours rediscovering my love for literature in the cozy town library, and cook simple meals for myself in my tiny kitchen. The silence that had been so terrifying and lonely in the ICU was now a comforting blanket. It was the silence of peace, not of abandonment. It's a strange thing to intentionally erase yourself, to teach yourself to respond to a new name, to recite a life story that isn't your own. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in a shop window and for a fleeting second, I wouldn't recognize the woman staring back. She looked older, yes, and there were new lines of caution etched around her eyes. But her shoulders were straighter. She was no longer bent under the weight of expectation and disappointment. That woman was Nora, and I was starting to really truly like her. But the ghosts of the past have a way of finding you, no matter how far you run or how well you hide. To keep myself from disappearing entirely into my own self-imposed solitude, I started volunteering at the Havenwood Public Library twice a week. The moment I walked in and smelled that beloved familiar scent of old paper and binding glue, I felt like I had come home. It was a world I understood. I spent my hours shelving books, carefully repairing torn pages with archival tape, and helping the elderly patrons navigate the intimidating world of the internet. It was quiet, purposeful work that asked nothing of me but my time and attention, and it gave me back a sense of usefulness I thought I had lost forever. That's how I met Sarah. She worked long, grueling nights at the 24-hour diner across the street, and she would come into the library every afternoon like clockwork to pick up her son Leo, who was 8 years old and spent his afternoons after school in the children's section. Sarah had tired eyes, the kind that have seen too many early mornings and rude customers, but she also had a quick, easy laugh that crinkled the corners of those eyes in the most beautiful way. You could see the bone-deep exhaustion of a single mother etched into her face, but you could also see a fierce, unyielding love for her son that was as bright as a beacon. Leo was a whirlwind of energy, a small boy with a big imagination who was completely obsessed with graphic novels. He was shy with me at first, hiding behind his mother's legs and peering at me from a safe distance. But he was a sharp kid, and he quickly noticed that I always knew where the latest superhero comics were shelved, and that I didn't talk down to him like some adults did. Soon he started seeking me out. He'd show me his elaborate drawings, sprawling battle scenes between heroes and villains with complicated backstories. I would listen with rapt attention, asking him serious questions about his character's motivations and powers. One rainy afternoon, he looked up at me from his comic book with his big, soulful brown eyes and asked, "Grandma Nora, can you read this one to me? My mom says I have to wait till she gets home." The name hung in the air between us, shimmering with a weight I hadn't anticipated. Grandma Nora. A name that belonged to a woman with a family, with roots, with grandchildren to spoil. My throat tightened, and for a second, the ghost of Carol Peterson, the grieving mother, wanted to correct him, to gently say, "Oh honey, I'm not a grandmother." But then I looked at his hopeful little face, a face that was asking for nothing more than a story, and the words died in my throat. I simply smiled, a real smile that felt a bit rusty, and said, "Of course, sweetheart. Let's find a comfy chair." From that day on, I was Grandma Nora. My lonely life began to expand, to make room. My quiet, solitary rhythm now included the happy chaos of Sarah and Leo. Some afternoons, I would help Leo with his multiplication tables while Sarah prepped for her long shift at the diner. On my days off, we'd go for walks by the river, and I'd teach Leo how to skip stones across the water, a skill his grandfather had taught me decades ago. Sarah would bring me a coffee from the diner, and we would sit on a bench and talk while Leo chased butterflies. She told me about her no-good ex-husband, about her constant struggle to make ends meet, about her dreams of one day going to community college. I told her the edited, fictional version of Nora Smith's life, a story that felt more and more like a lie every time I told it in the face of her raw, honest vulnerability. They became my family. A family I had chosen, a family that had, in their own quiet way, chosen me. They didn't want my money or my house. They just wanted me. My time, my attention, my stories. The unrestrained laughter of a little boy who adored me was a better medicine than any pill a doctor could ever prescribe. It was slowly, carefully stitching my broken heart back together, one silly joke at a time. It was the first time in so long that I felt safe. I just want to pause and say thank you for sticking with me on this journey. It means the world. If you're still here listening to my story, could you do me a favor and just comment the number 1? It lets me know I'm not just talking into the void, and that you're with me on this. I had started to believe that I had truly escaped, that I had found my happy ending. I let my guard down, and that was my mistake. Happiness, I learned, can make you careless. The second Saturday in October was the library's annual community reading day, a beloved Havenwood tradition. The lawn in front of the library was a cheerful patchwork of families sitting on picnic blankets, and the library staff had set up colorful banners and a small stage. I had volunteered to read at the children's corner. I sat in a big, comfortable wooden chair, surrounded by a semicircle of wide-eyed, eager kids, with Leo sitting right at my feet, his small body leaning contentedly against my knee. The autumn air was crisp and smelled of apples and fallen leaves. I put on my best storyteller's voice, the one I used to use with my own children, and read a classic about a brave little mouse on a grand adventure. The children were captivated. The parents were beaming, happy for a few moments of peace. It was a perfect golden autumn afternoon, a moment of pure, simple joy. What I didn't notice in my happy bubble was one of the younger librarians, a cheerful and tech-savvy girl named Amy, who was documenting the entire event for the library's social media page. She took a lovely photograph of me at the peak of the story, my face animated, smiling down at the circle of children, a book open in my hands. The afternoon sunlight was filtering through the brilliant red and orange autumn leaves behind me, creating a beautiful warm glow. It was a picture of pure, simple happiness. A picture of Grandma Nora, the beloved library volunteer, in her natural element. She posted it that evening to the official Havenwood Public Library Facebook page. The caption was sweet and innocent. A big thank you to our wonderful volunteer Nora Smith for bringing stories to life at our community reading day. We are so lucky to have you. I saw the post later that night and I smiled. I even liked it from the anonymous profile I had created. Seeing that photo, seeing the happy faces of the children, felt validating. It was a small tangible proof of my new life, my new identity. What could be the harm? It was a small town library page with a few hundred followers, mostly local parents and patrons. Felt safe. I was so terribly, tragically naive. 3 days later, my carefully constructed world imploded. I was in the history section, shelving a set of dusty biographies, when Sarah burst through the library doors. Her face was pale, her breathing ragged, and she clutched her phone in her hand like it was a live grenade. "Nora," she whispered, her voice tight with panic as she rushed towards me. "You need to see this. Now." She pulled me into a quiet corner, behind a tall shelf of maps, her hands shaking. She showed me her phone. Someone had shared the library's photo, but they had shared it to a much larger, much more public group. A group with tens of thousands of members from all over the country. A group called Finding Missing Loved Ones. And above the beautiful, innocent photo of me and the children, a new sinister caption had been added. It was a post from my daughter Amanda. Update. Possible sighting in Vermont. Has anyone in the Havenwood, Vermont area seen this woman? Her name is Carol Peterson. Our mother. She suffers from severe confusion and memory loss after a major heart attack and wandered away from her home in Ohio 2 months ago. She may be using an alias like Nora. She is a beloved mother and grandmother and we are desperate with worry. We just want to bring her home safely. Please share this post. Below her desperate, manipulative plea, the comments were flooding in. A horrifying cascade of my two worlds colliding. "Oh my God, that's Nora from our library. She's the sweetest lady. Praying for your family. I hope you find your poor mother. Wait, her name isn't Nora? She told my wife she was a widow from Pennsylvania with no kids. Someone needs to call the police and have them check on her. She might not be safe." My stomach dropped like a stone in a well. In a matter of hours, my fortress of anonymity had been blown to pieces by a single click, a single share. Amanda had brilliantly weaponized social media, painting me as a senile, vulnerable old woman who had wandered off, and herself as the distraught, loving daughter desperate to save me. It was a masterful, evil move. She wasn't just looking for me. She was systematically destroying my new life before she even arrived, turning my new friends and neighbors against me with a web of insidious lies. My quiet sanctuary had become a fishbowl. The news would spread through a small town like this like wildfire. The friendly smiles I was used to would be replaced with looks of suspicion and pity. My new life was over. The peace I had fought so hard to find was shattered. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they were coming. For 2 days I was a prisoner in my own apartment. I kept the blinds drawn, starting at every sound from the street below. The phone at the library, I later learned from Sarah, rang constantly. People from town, their intentions likely good but their actions fueled by Amanda's lies, were calling to report sightings of the confused woman from the internet. A few had even called the local police to request a wellness check on me. The kind police chief, a man I recognized from the diner, had knocked on my door. I'd spoken to him through the door, assuring him I was fine and simply wished to be left alone. But the encounter left me shaken and humiliated. Sarah was my only link to the outside world, a fierce and loyal guardian. She brought me groceries and fielded questions from concerned townsfolk with a stony defense that brought tears to my eyes. "They're painting you as some crazy, helpless old lady," she told me on the second night, her voice vibrating with anger as she sat in my small kitchen. "It's not right. It's cruel. Don't you let them win, Nora. Or Carol. I don't care what your name is. Don't you let them." Her words were like a splash of cold water. She was right. I hadn't survived a heart attack. I hadn't outsmarted my manipulative children. I hadn't rebuilt my life from absolute scratch just to crumble and hide at the first sign of conflict. I was done being a victim. I was done hiding. On the third day I got up, took a long shower and put on my favorite dress. I walked to the library. I held my head high, my shoulders back, ignoring the whispers and the curious, pitying stares that followed me down Main Street. I was going to work my volunteer shift as if nothing had happened. I was Nora Smith, a resident of this town, and I would not be driven out by gossip and lies. I was in the fiction aisle, reshelving books, the simple, repetitive task a calming balm on my frayed nerves. That's when I saw it through the large front window that looked out onto the town square. A silver SUV with Ohio license plates. It circled the square once, slowly, deliberately, like a shark testing the waters, before pulling into a parking spot directly in front of the library. My breath caught in my chest, a painful, sharp gasp. The book I was holding, a heavy copy of Moby Dick, slipped from my nerveless fingers and fell to the floor with a dull, heavy thud. The driver's side door opened, and Amanda stepped out. She looked different. She was thinner than I remembered, and the polished, confident aura she always carried had been replaced by something brittle and frayed at the edges. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, her eyes scanning the building, until they locked on mine through the glass. There was no surprise in her expression, only a grim, weary sort of recognition. She had found her target. I took a deep, shuddering breath, left the book on the floor, and walked towards the entrance. My hands were shaking, but my steps were steady and measured. I pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped out into the crisp, unforgiving autumn air. The cold felt good, real, grounding me in the present moment. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, 10 feet of cracked sidewalk separating 2 years of pain, silence, and profound betrayal. "Mom," she said, and her voice cracked on the single word. It was a word she had forfeited, a title she no longer had any right to use. An old, forgotten instinct stirred deep inside me. The mother's primal urge to comfort her child, to soothe her distress, to make it all okay. But it died as quickly as it came, brutally extinguished by the memory of a cold, 10-word note and a glossy for sale sign. "Don't," I said, my voice low and steady, colder than the Vermont air. "Don't you dare call me that." Tears, predictable and pathetic, welled in her eyes. "Please," she whispered, taking a step closer. "We were so worried. We didn't know where you were. We thought something terrible had happened." A laugh escaped my lips. It was a harsh, ugly sound that had no humor in it. The sound of a heart breaking all over again. "Worried," I said, taking a step forward myself, closing the distance, refusing to be the one who retreated. The hunter was no longer the hunted. "You weren't worried when you left me alone in an ICU bed to go on a cruise. You weren't worried when you sold my belongings on Facebook like a common grave robber. You weren't worried when you tried to sell the roof over my head and stick me in a home to be forgotten. That's not worry, Amanda. That's greed." The tears spilled over, streaming down her pale face. "It wasn't like that," she sobbed, the classic refuge of someone caught in a lie. "It was complicated. You were so sick. I was scared. I was scared of losing you, of watching you get weak." "You weren't scared of losing me," I corrected her, my voice as sharp and clean as broken glass. "You were scared of being burdened by me. There is a profound and important difference." I looked her dead in the eye, channeling all the pain and rage of the past few months into my gaze. "I already had my funeral, Amanda. You just weren't invited." She flinched as if I had physically slapped her. She opened her mouth to say something else, to offer another well-rehearsed excuse. But before she could, a second car, a modest, dusty sedan, pulled up right behind her gleaming SUV. Mark got out of the car. He looked older, more careworn and haggard than I had ever seen him. The boyish charm he'd always used to skate through life was gone, replaced by the heavy, ill-fitting burden of his own choices. He wasn't holding a coffee cup or scrolling on his phone. He was clutching a large manila envelope to his chest like a shield. He didn't rush forward to join his sister in her tearful performance. He just stood by the door of his car, his eyes meeting mine with a look of such profound and bottomless shame that it almost took my breath away. He had always been the follower, the one who let Amanda's stronger personality take the lead, but in that moment, the full weight of his complicity, of his silent, willing participation, was written all over his face. Amanda turned, surprised to see him. It was immediately, painfully clear they hadn't arrived together. This was not a united front, not a coordinated rescue mission for their confused mother. This was a fractured, desperate, last-ditch attempt at an armistice, and they hadn't even bothered to coordinate their approach. I didn't wait for them to regroup and form a strategy. I held the high ground now, and I knew it. "What do you want?" I asked, my gaze shifting from my daughter's tear-streaked face to my son's downcast one. Mark took a tentative, shuffling step forward, as if walking towards his own sentencing. "We just want to talk, Mom," he said, his voice quiet and hoarse. "We made a terrible mistake." "Mistake is what you call taking the wrong exit on the highway, Mark," I replied, my voice unyielding but devoid of the sharp anger I'd shown Amanda. My disappointment in him was a deeper, sadder thing. "What you two did was a calculated campaign. You conspired to strip me of my home, my savings, and my dignity. You left me for dead, thinking you'd be free to spend my life savings on bigger houses and newer cars." Mark flinched as if my words were physical blows. He looked down at the envelope in his hands, then back up at me, his eyes pleading. He walked forward and held it out to me. I wanted you to have this. I didn't take it. I just looked at his outstretched hand. "What is it?" "It's everything," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. "Regret? Self-pity? It's the money from the furniture we sold online. All of it. I tracked down the buyers. And this." He fumbled inside the envelope and pulled out a single dog-eared photograph. It was the last family picture we had taken with their father, Frank, at a lakeside picnic the summer before he got sick. We were all smiling, a happy, normal family frozen in a moment of time that now felt like a complete and utter lie. On the back of the photo, in his familiar, slightly slanted scrawl, he had written, "I am so sorry, Mom. I was weak and I was selfish. I would give anything to go back. Please let us fix this." I looked from the photograph to his face, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I saw a glimmer of the little boy I had raised, the sensitive boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on an ant. That glimmer of the child he once was, it almost broke me. Almost. "You can't fix this, Mark," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, not with forgiveness, but with a sad, weary finality. "Some things, once they are shattered, can't be put back together. You can't unring a bell. You can't unknow what you now know. And I know who you both are now. I see you clearly for the first time." I turned my attention back to Amanda, who had been watching this exchange in stunned silence, her tears momentarily forgotten. "I have a life here," I told them both, my voice growing stronger with every word. "A good life. A peaceful life. With people who value me for who I am. Not for what I have in my bank account. People who show up." I looked over my shoulder at the library, my sanctuary. I looked across the street towards the diner where Sarah was probably watching from the front window, ready to run out if I needed her. I thought of Leo, who would be expecting me to help him with his homework in an hour. A simple, lovely promise. "I am not coming back," I said, and the words were a vow, a closing of a book, a final turning of a key in a lock. "My life as your mother is over. You buried her when you got on that cruise ship." I turned and walked away. I walked back towards the library door, not quickly, but with a deliberate final pace that brooked no argument. I didn't look back. I could hear Amanda start to sob again. A loud, desperate sound that no longer had any power over me. I could feel my son's eyes on my back, a weight of sorrow and regret, but I kept walking. Their grief was their own to carry now. I had carried it for them and for all of us long enough. That evening, I sat with Sarah on the small, slightly rickety porch of her apartment after Leo had gone to bed. The air was cool and crisp, and it smelled of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney and the clean, earthy scent of impending winter. I held a warm mug of tea in my hands, and I told her everything. The real story. Not Nora Smith's sanitized, fictional history, but Carol Peterson's painful, messy, unbelievable truth. I told her about the ICU, the note, the house, the iPad, the escape, the confrontation. I didn't cry. I was past tears. I just told the story, letting the words hang in the quiet night air, releasing them once and for all. She listened without interrupting, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. Her expression shifted from shock to a quiet, simmering anger on my behalf, and finally to a deep, profound empathy. When I finished, the silence stretched for a comfortable moment. She didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. She didn't say, "I'm sure they didn't mean it," or "maybe you can forgive them someday." She just reached out across the small table between us and took my hand. Her hand was warm and strong, callous from years of hard work. "You are the bravest woman I have ever met," she said softly, her voice full of a conviction that resonated deep in my soul. "And you are our family, Carol. Or Nora. I don't care what name you choose. You are family. And we're not going anywhere." In that moment, under the vast starry Vermont sky, I finally understood. All my life I had believed that family was a matter of blood, an unbreakable, sacred bond forged by birth. I had poured my entire life, my love, my energy, my finances, into that belief, into my 2 children. But my blood had betrayed me. My sacred bond had been broken, revealed to be nothing more than a one-sided contract I hadn't realized I was signing. The life I had now, the life I had built from the ashes of the old one, was built on something different. Something quieter but infinitely stronger. It was built on kindness, on shared cups of coffee, on patiently helping a little boy with his spelling words, on the quiet, unspoken understanding between 2 women navigating the hardships of life alone. It was a family of the heart, forged not by obligation but by choice. The next day, as I was walking with Leo in the park, he stopped suddenly and bent down to pick up a particularly brilliant red maple leaf, one that was shaped like a perfect star. He ran up to me, his face beaming with the pure, unadulterated joy that only a child can possess, and held it out to me like a precious treasure. "Grandma Nora," he said, his voice full of excitement, "look what I found. It's for you." I took the leaf from his small, warm hand. I looked down at his bright, innocent face, a face full of a love that asked for nothing in return, and I smiled. It was a real, genuine smile, one that reached my eyes and filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the autumn sun. There was no pain in the name anymore. There was no ghost of another life. There was only the sweet, simple truth of the present moment. He was my grandson, not by blood, but by a bond that had proven to be so much stronger. My life now is not the one I planned. It's smaller, quieter, more modest. But it is infinitely richer and more authentic. I have learned that peace isn't about having a big house or a healthy savings account. It's about the people who show up. It's about the hand that steadies you when you stumble, the voice that answers when you call, the presence that sits with you in the dark and doesn't ask you to be anything other than what you are. My story is a painful one, but it brought me here, to this quiet town, to this found family. It taught me the hardest and most important lesson of my life. You can't choose the family you are born into, but you absolutely have the power to choose the family that sees you through to the end. And sometimes the most courageous thing you can possibly do is to say goodbye to the life you thought you wanted, to make room for the life that is truly waiting for you. Thank you so much for listening to my story from beginning to end. It wasn't easy to tell, but sharing it helps. It reminds me how far I've come and that my story has value. I have one last question for you. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace? Or have you found family in an unexpected place? Please, share your story or your thoughts in the comments below. Reading them helps me, and I know your words could help someone else feel a little less alone in their struggle. If my story resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose yourself. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories that remind us of the incredible strength of the human spirit. Thank you again for being here. Be well and be kind to yourselves.